What's going on, Skullbrains? Welcome back to Skullbrain TV. Have Richard, Orkin, and Melik come to the end of their journey at the sheer force of an unstoppable waterfall? Spoiler alert? No.
When he, who is the chosen one, shall tread upon the ancient path, and battle there to overcome
the forces of the dark.
The Ancestral Trail, an epic story of myths, magic, and monsters. Book 24, Syrus, Spirit of the Sky, devilish dealings with a devious genie.
In the last episode, the trio came under attack by Dagmar, the winged demon of fire, and were rescued by a guardian of the Ancestral City, Dion the Firebird. Dion defeats Dagmar but is badly injured and returns to the Ancestral City to have her wounds taken care of. Richard, Orkin, and Melik continue on their path to retrieve the final life force pod in Sorcerer's Falls, but are stopped when they come across a gigantic waterfall with no way of getting through it. So, how do they continue their adventure? Before we find out, let's go over the Ancestral challenges for this issue. Look out for Shumi and Shubi. Also, in this issue, Richard's instincts lead him to a certain potion bottle to help them save the day. Look at the bottles on pages 380 and 381 and see if you can figure out which one Richard chose. As for Morbane's Monsters and Magic Challenge, you can find a link to the cards for this episode in the description, and after listening to the story, see if you can guess who Syrus is based on, Beelzebub or Genie of the Lamp.
Devilish dealings with a devious genie.
In the last episode, if you guessed that Dagmar was based on the Chimera, you were correct. Again, in this episode, I've decided to switch it up a little bit. So I have my own little Ancestral challenge for you. See if you can guess who voices one of the new companions of the trio. If you've been with the series since the beginning, you should all be very familiar with this voice. Okay, are you ready? Let's do this.
On the 24th day, when risen from enchanted blight, a slender hope across the height takes them to the torrent's door, swept by spirit off the floor. Then in evil's clutches bound, break with thrice the backward sound of names of those so tightly held, the genie's magic rudely spelled.
As the companions stared at the waterfall, Richard scanned the sheer rock face. The water fell in torrents between towering cliffs. There was no way of getting through Sorcerer's Falls. Richard turned to the dwarf. Melik, what does the Book of Prophecies have to say? He asked. Maybe it holds a clue to the way through this waterfall. The dwarf opened the book and read the riddle out loud. As Melik finished, Richard looked around the steep cliffs and spotted something he had not noticed before. Running along the rock face was a narrow fault line, the result of some ancient subsidence. Where the rock had shifted, there was now a slight ledge which rose diagonally to a point midway up the falls. A slender hope across the height. That's where we go, Richard said. When he approached the ledge, he had second thoughts. It really was a slender hope. The ledge was very narrow, and the cliff above it sloped gently outwards. They could just get along it, he reckoned, but the water spray made visibility virtually non-existent. Richard went first. With his body pressed close to the cliff, he moved cautiously along the ledge. Behind him came Orkin, then Melik. It was a nerve-wracking journey. The sloping cliff forced them to bend their bodies in a painful arc and gave them the impression they were about to be pushed over the edge. The higher the ledge climbed, the more terrifying their ordeal became. Every pebble underfoot, every bulge in the cliff became a source of possible disaster. When they reached the cascading water, conditions eased. The ledge widened, the cliff straightened out, and they found themselves on a path that curved gently into the falling torrent. Richard took a deep breath and stepped into the wall of water. The waterfall was surprisingly thin, more of a curtain than a wall, and after a few paces, Richard emerged on the other side. Ahead of him, a tunnel sloped gently up into the heart of the mountain. Orkan joined him seconds later, then Melik came, crouching over the Book of Prophecies to protect it from the deluge. "That wasn't too bad," Richard said as the dwarf shouldered the book again. "We'd better get on." The tunnel in front of the trio was lit by an eerie glow that seemed to come from the walls. As they walked along, their footsteps rang with a strange, liquid echo. After a while, Richard saw a small wisp of smoke curling out of the floor ahead. The delicate spiral grew rapidly until it was a tall column of white vapor shot through with tiny sparks of light that twinkled in all the colors of the rainbow. Richard stared in amazement as the pillar of smoke drifted slowly in their direction. The smoke began to mold itself into another shape. First, a round, bald head with pointed ears and a cruel mouth appeared. Then came broad shoulders, set above a muscled torso that shone as if it had been oiled. The lower half of the apparition was nothing more than smoke. The creature was a genie.
"Who dares enter the realm of Syrus, spirit of the sky?"
the genie demanded. Richard's mind worked fast. They were too near their goal to jeopardize matters with an unnecessary fight. Richard tried to placate the creature. "We mean no harm, Syrus," Richard said. "We only want to reach Wizard's Well. We apologize for coming into your domain uninvited. Please, allow us through." Cyrus's face writhed in derision.
"You can't fool me," he laughed. "I know why you want to get to Wizard's Well."
Syrus pointed one long nailed finger in their direction, freezing the trio in mid-movement.
"I think it's time you learned a lesson,"
the genie said, raising another finger. Multicolored smoke oozed from the floor and enveloped them in a thick cone. They felt themselves rise gently off the ground. Then they were in Cyrus's huge palm.
"Now you're mine,"
Syrus said, glaring at the three in his open hand. Pointed nails clicked like a prison gate as the genie's fingers closed around the trio. The creature floated back up the tunnel, holding the three tightly in his grip. The cone of smoke followed in his wake. Trapped in Cyrus's fog, their vision blocked by wreaths of smoke, the companions felt as if time and distance had dissolved into a blur. When the trio's journey came to an end, it took them all by surprise. The smoke vanished in the blink of an eye, the genie's hands opened, and the companions fell jarringly to the ground. To their relief, they discovered they were able to move once more. The three were in a high-ceilinged room whose walls were swathed in drapes of brilliant silk. The rich mahogany floor was strewn with exotic rugs. Syrus floated before them, surrounded on all sides by a carpet of grey bubbles. Inside the bubbles, Richard was amazed to see scores of tiny figures.
"This is your final destination,"
Syrus boomed.
"I hope you like it. You're going to be here for a very long time, so get used to it."
Orkan unslung his bow and, notching in an arrow, he drew it and aimed it at the genie. Syrus gave a wry grin, then pointed a finger at the trio. Darkness fell over them like a thunderclap. When it cleared, they were standing in exactly the same spot, but they had been shrunk to the size of dolls and trapped in one of the bubbles that drifted over the floor.
"Enjoy yourselves,"
the genie cackled. He clapped his hands and disappeared in a blinding flash. The trio pushed and stabbed at the walls of the bubble, but it was made of a thin, rubbery material that defied all attempts to puncture it. "Let's get over to one of the other bubbles and see who's in them," Richard said. By walking up the sides of their spherical prison, the three were able to roll it along the floor until it bumped into one of the other bubbles. "It's my people!" Melik cried, peering through the grey membrane. "It's the landsmen!" "Ask them what's been going on," Richard said. "Maybe we can help each other to escape." Melik struck up a long conversation with one of his captured kinsfolk, probing him on every aspect of their prison and Syrus. Richard and Orkin listened enthralled and did not interrupt the landsman as he told Melik about their capture. Syrus was keeping them here until the Evil One arrived. They had tried everything to break the bubbles by force, but nothing worked. The bubbles had been created by magic, and only magic could destroy them. "When is the Evil One coming?" Richard asked urgently.
We're not sure,
The landsman called back.
but he must not find us here.
Magic, Richard pondered. Didn't the prophecy say something about spells?
Break with thrice the backward sound of names of those so tightly held, the genie's magic rudely spelled.
Melik quoted out loud. I wonder, Richard mused. Let's try saying our names backwards 3 times.
Kill him!
Necro! Drasir! Each repeated the incantation 3 times. The bubble burst, releasing an oily smoke that floated up to the ceiling. Richard called for the landsman to do the same, and soon the room resounded to a babble of outlandish words and the popping of bubbles. By the time all the landsmen were free, a dark smog hung heavily above the chandeliers. The landsman leader, a thin, lugubrious man with a big nose, came up to Richard and introduced himself.
My name is Ronek.
He said,
Thank you for what you've done. Now all we need is to get back to normal size.
It was something Richard had not considered. Ronek was right. Somehow they had to find a way of regaining their usual height. There was nothing in the prophecy that told them how to do that. Richard walked towards the only door he could see, and the others fell in behind him, a flock of diminutive mannequins, whose whispered conversation rose like wind, sighing through a cornfield. The door stood slightly ajar, and they approached it cautiously, lest the room be occupied. There was nobody there. All the room contained was row upon row of wooden tables, stacked with strange-looking equipment, and a set of shelves holding a mysterious assortment of jars and bottles. As Richard approached them, his hair rose as if he had entered an electrical field. Richard managed to climb up onto a shelf, followed by Melik and Orkin. The bottles bore strange signs and symbols. Richard looked at them bemused. Then his instinct led him to a bottle, which he somehow knew was the one whose contents would break the spell. Calling on some landsmen to help him, Richard managed to get the bottle onto its side. Cautiously, he pulled out the stopper, and a thick, pink liquid started to ooze slowly from the top. Richard rubbed a small amount onto the back of his hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with startling speed, Richard soared to his original height, toppling to the floor as he did so. He quickly stood up, took the bottle from the shelf, and allowed the liquid to ooze out onto the floor. He called Orkin, Melik, and the landsman over and told everyone to rub some of the liquid onto their skin. Soon, everyone was back to their original size. Let's go quickly, Richard said. Syrus may be back any minute.
We can't leave yet,
Ronek replied.
We must go back for our weapons.
Ronek led the way back to the room in which they had been imprisoned. Resting against the far wall was a jumble of weapons and armour which Ronek's men quickly reclaimed. When they had finished, there remained one suit of shining silver armour.
This belonged to one of our greatest heroes,
Ronek told Richard.
He was killed when we were captured by sailors. Now it is yours.
Richard accepted the gift gratefully and strapped the unfamiliar pieces of metal onto his body. The armour fitted perfectly and was so light that he hardly knew he had it on. Waving his sword, he felt a powerful sensation of confidence. Now, he could face anything. Ronek led the party back through the workshop, and a door he hoped would take them to freedom. The last landsman had gone through, and the 3 were about to follow when a jet of smoke appeared. With incredible speed, it formed into the evil shape of Syrus. The genie lifted one of his long fingers. Even with his new armor, there was nothing Richard could do against Syrus's magic. It was the end. And that is the end of book number 24. Only 2 more to go. How did you go with the challenges for this issue? Shumi and Shubi appeared twice again, once on page 372 and on page 374. As for the bottle that Richard chose to get them back to their original sizes, did you spot the bottle with this mark on page 380? The 2 arrows could only mean going from small to large. Now, don't forget to download the Magic and Monsters cards that came with this issue and see if you can guess who Syrus is based on. Also, in the description is a link to this issue's map piece and the next letter token for the Power of Evil challenge. Thank you so much for watching, and if you've enjoyed this episode, give it a little thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you can be notified when the next episode drops. And until then, as always, stay tuned, stay skull-brained.